Hello, everybody. I am Kathleen Watkins, and welcome to the Outlive Your Life Legacy Podcast, the podcast where we talk about writing. Not just writing, though. We talk about legacy writing. One of the greatest risks we face each day is living day to day without any reflection at all of who we are, what we've done, and where we've been, and what really matters to us. Each of us is unique. In fact, there's never been anyone exactly like you, and there never will be. Today, we are going to be talking about leaving a legacy of our life story. I know that most of us, when we hear legacy, there are certain things that we think of, but I want to turn your attention to another legacy. In fact, one that I think is even much more important than the one that I'm sure you're thinking about. But before we get into all of that, why don't we meet our guests? I have some great guests with me. In fact, they are the same guests. We enjoyed each other so much the last time we decided to get together again. So let's go ahead and meet them, beginning over here to my right.
Hello, I'm Kendall Brown. I am a good friend with Kathleen Watkins, and this is my second time to take part in the podcast, and so I'm just happy to be here. Thank you for having me, and I appreciate you asking me to be a part of this.
So glad you could make it.
I'm Santiago Ramones. I am the podcast producer here at Possibilities, and I also spend a lot of time thinking about legacy and kind of the things that might mean. And so I'm very excited for this conversation.
Well, thank you. So you spend a lot of time thinking about your legacy.
Not even necessarily my legacy, but also about legacy in general. So, I mean, I get to work on podcasts all the time.
Okay.
And so maybe to even kind of jumpstart where you're probably moving towards, a lot of people think of legacy as having kids and what they leave behind as well. But with podcasts in particular, that in itself is a form of legacy. We're leaving something behind, not just in our writing, but we're actually leaving something behind that anyone other than our kids can go back to and listen to. And I've also worked with a number of other different podcasters who make legacy a part of their message or vision or whatever that is. And so, yeah, legacy is kind of an important part of podcasts as a whole. And so in some ways, for me, I don't have kids. I still don't know if I will or whatever that might be. And so for me, my legacy is what I leave behind through my music, through my writing, through my podcasts.
Okay, so you just jumped right in there. And I think that was my first talking point. I want to say that a lot of us, or a lot of you, when we think about writing our stories, our life stories, and leaving it behind for our descendants, it can be overwhelming, especially if it's in a written document, because writing is different from speaking. In other words, let's say if you left a video or if you just left a recording, it's just a little bit different. And it's different because when you write, you have to really think. And a lot of times when we speak, and we're just speaking. talking because we don't have time unless we're reading to really think. But when you're writing, you have that time to really think about what you're writing. And when you think, then you remember things. In my opinion, I don't think that is no greater gift than reading the legacy of your life story for your family. And you notice I didn't say descendants because I didn't want to, I wanted to kind of, because I know you're young, though, Santiago, you don't know what's in the future for you. But even if you don't have children, a lot of people never have children, but they do have family or whatever. And a lot of people, I'm told, they leave it for their community, their stories, because people are always fishing for things, historical things. They'll go back and they'll see this or they'll see that. They look in archives, newspaper archives, podcast archives, or whatever. And so it really, really does matter. Sometimes people write their stories in an autobiography, which is a chronological record, meaning we usually start from the time you were your childhood, or even when you were born. And some do it in a memoir, which I did. I did a memoir, and it's usually for a certain part of your life or a certain theme. For instance, the name of my memoir was I Can Smell the Coffee Now, a short memoir of lessons learned. So in writing that, I was writing it for my granddaughter in the beginning, but then I realized this is all my grandchildren, and not just all of my grandchildren, but other people too, because it's lessons that I learned, which everyone can maybe learn something from. And then the legacy letter, which is less intimidating because you are writing about what's the things that are important to you, the lessons you have learned. You're leaving some nuggets, wisdom behind for those who follow you. So it's important. I always say, on your tombstone, what do you have? The birth date and the date you leave here. What's all that in between? Yes, I love that. It's our life. It's our life, and it matters. So, Kendall, let's look at that. I know that in the past, everybody, when you think of a legacy, you usually think of what? What comes to your mind?
Well, most often, thank you for that question, but most oftentimes you think of an inheritance. You assume that legacy is only what's being left to you. For me, I learned, and I started thinking about legacy about, I would say maybe 12 years ago. So my grandfather, the late Arenzi Brown, was a certain particular type of man. And I never knew anything about him growing up. And before he passed, he said to me, "I love you." And when he said he loved me, I said, my grandfather's about to die. And because he wasn't a man that said what's considered soft words like that. And so I learned more about him after he passed than I knew of him while he was alive. And so it got me thinking about legacy. Like, what are you going to leave behind? Life leaves clues, and if you are intentional, you want the people that you say you love the most, the people that you care about, those people that you get up out of bed every day to take care of, you want them to know you at your core. And the greatest benefit is for me to tell you who I am versus someone else telling you. And so when I think about legacy, I think about not what I'm going to leave as far as an inheritance, But we were out front talking before we started, and I told you that I'm always looking and I'm always searching. And what I'm searching for is an advantage. I'm searching for little bits and pieces that I can steal from you, because in my industry, we have a saying called CASE, copy and steal everything. So I'm going to steal a little piece of something from you, and I'm going to take that and apply that in my life. However, I want to do it in such a way that it benefits those that I love. So I can, when I write the story, I can tell them those little gems that I found along the way that's going to give them the advantage, but also allow them to know who I am, what I was about, what my core values were, what my principles were, what I stood for. And so legacy to me is one of the greatest gifts that you can leave for someone. And, you don't have to have children. You don't have to have family. You can leave legacy to complete strangers. And the idea of legacy is we oftentimes think about what we do while we're alive. But what I'm finding out is that life that you were talking about, that dash, that's the precursor to the legacy. I'm finding out that the legacy actually really starts to unfold after you're gone.
Interesting that you say that, because I heard someone say that even though we may prepare a legacy, we think, for instance, I would like to be remembered as that family member who documented everything. She's the one, Kathleen, and I do rather. That's how I would like to be remembered. But it's funny, now the great Maya Angelou says we can prepare all we want. We really don't know what our legacy will be. But, we still can think about how we want to be remembered. Because everybody, it's just, I don't know, it's a strange thing. What do you think about that, Santiago?
It's a funny thing about thinking about how we want to be remembered. I feel like we live in such a social media age that this sort of presentation side of ourselves is becoming a bigger part of my generation and younger. And so the how we are remembered seems to be a lot more important than even just what you're leaving behind. And so it's a very interesting thing, because I was thinking about the distinction between when you write something down versus us recording this, for instance, that when you do write something down, you are having some preparation, you can edit it, you can distill it down into its purest form. And that is a part of you in a way, but it isn't, it's a version of you, right? It's a pure modified version that you kind of distill down into this perfection even. But our day-to-day selves aren't that filtered down. They're not that clean. We are human beings. This is the way that I talk. Sometimes I say sometimes I say like too many times. And this recording is another version of what people can hear of us maybe many years down the line. Maybe in 20 years, I can go back to this recording and go, wow, that's a very different person than who I know now. And that's a very different legacy as well. And so a lot of times, yes, the medium changes that, but we're leaving different clues as to who we were, who we have been, who we're becoming. And each different version of that, if you have it in writing, if you have it in photos, if you have it in video or recordings, can help paint a picture of what this entire thing is, because we're not just that piece of writing that we left behind, and we're not just this recording that we left behind. We're a combination of all those different things. But you can have a more clear picture if you leave behind a variety of those things. To have a little aside here, for my podcast that I've had for over 7 years now, I now have 2 former guests who have passed away. And it's a little rough, actually, because one of these passed away literally last night. He had been battling cancer, and he's one of my best friend's dad. And so thinking of what we recorded on my podcast, that is a form of legacy that he gets to leave behind. And for his family and the people that love him to be able to go back to and remember him. I mean, he had been battling cancer for some time. And so that memory of him in the weeks, months leading up to his passing are riddled with pain and a lot of difficulty because of how that process of dying is so challenging. But to then go back even further to see who the man was in a recording, and what that leaves behind is really special. And I'm glad that recording exists and that it was able to happen before he was diagnosed and before going through all of that. And so his legacy is left behind, yes, in the many other aspects of his life, but then also another version of him in conversation is still here in recording. And so I understand the weight of what this thing is too, that we are leaving behind something for those that care about us, that we are leaving behind something that they can go back to and remember, this is who that was in that way.
Yeah, that kind of leads to my second talking point too. But before I get to that, let me say this. You know, what I have noticed is that there's so many things that we really don't know about each other. Even those people who are very close to us. And to me, that's just kind of not scary, but it's just interesting how little we know about one another. For instance, what a child knows about his parents, his mom or dad. You know, what do your mama like? What if you ask a child, you know, well, what's your mom's favorite color? They might know it. They may. I don't know. I think it's so-and-so. Or what was her favorite song? I don't know. When a person dies and whoever is writing the obituary, I have seen it a few times. You don't know what to write. It's like, wait a minute now. I think this was it. No, it was this. And that's why I recommend write your own obituary. Write your own obituary. If you wanted to say what you wanted to say, do it. Because people, they really don't know a whole lot about you. And it really comes better from you anyway. And I want to say this. I want you to think of someone in your family who has gone on. And what memories do you have of that person? One of your ancestors, which you knew, it could be your grandmother, great-grandmother, just your grandparents, aunt, uncle. And when you think of that person, what comes to your mind? That I think is very interesting, because I think everyone would probably have a different answer for that. what they remember about that person. When my mom was everybody says that, and she was, she was a good person, love it, but my mom loved to fuss. Do you hear me? My mom fussed all the time. I don't care what you did. She was going to find something. Oh, you could have done this. You could have. And a lot of times that comes to my mind about her. Another thing about her, she loves to sit on the porch. My mom loved to sit on the porch. And I think, oh, God, girl, if only you would have had I'm just going to say, if you had known you should have sat down with her and talked to her. What was on her mind? What was on her mind? But I was so busy, young, so busy living my life, I didn't have time. So what about you, Kendall? I mean, just think of somebody.
Yeah, so thank you for this question. And, before I get into that, I'm sorry for the loss that you're experiencing now. And I do appreciate the fact that you have captured that on recording. And, what we're talking about here, and I like what both of you said, you are able to, because we oftentimes send out our representative, right? And somehow we're programmed to be so close to someone, but not allow them to know what's really going on deep inside. And so we with the media today, we send out, hey, look at me, I'm happy today, I'm smiling, and all of this. But inside, there's a turmoil, there's a battle that we don't share. And so when you take all of the mediums, the ways that you can create a legacy, it allows you to capture the space and time in which you're dealing or battling something in that moment, and it shows the different phases and seasons that you experience in life. And for me, it would be my grandmother. My grandmother was my best friend, and she was one of those people who was very just tranquil. And then in the snap of a hat, the flick of your finger, she is a whole different person. And I never knew, and I always wondered, my grandmother had a really wild side. Because when I remember growing up, as I think back, she had this Cadillac, and it was the real long one. It had like a 400-something cubic inch motor, and she would fly in speeding ticket after speeding ticket. But then when you see her, she was so just calm and docile all the time. And it's like when she would get in that Cadillac, she became a whole other person. You better watch out because she would run you off the road. Yeah. And so there's so many different things that I know about her. And then there's so many different things that I wish I knew about her. Like how she was growing up, how she was with her brothers and sisters, and, some of the things that helped her become who she became. I remember she was the type of grandmother that when I was 7 years old, she would make me study stocks and the stock market, and she would quiz me on this. And I'm like, my friends are outside riding their bikes, they're playing, they're wanting me to come out. And she says, yeah, that's fine. You can go whenever you finish this. And so she was very in tune with investing and things like that. And at the time, I never knew what she was doing. But later on, as I grew older, I realized how financial savvy she was. She was very aware of the stock markets and housing and all of these things that would allow you to build a portfolio. And, when you're 7, you're just like, I don't need this garbage. You know, I want to go play. But she was actually leaving her legacy within me, and because I'm the oldest grandson, the very first grandchild. And so I never knew what she was doing at the time. And it wasn't until after she already passed that I start to really learn what it was all about.
In hindsight, you can see that now.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Santiago? Is there any one family member in your life that you want to just speak briefly on?
Yeah, it's a very interesting perspective from my end in that, one, I have had a very small number of close people to me pass away, like family. And so my maternal grandfather, my mom's dad, passed away last year. And was that last year? Wow. Maybe it was, I don't know. So the interesting part is that I came to the US as a 6-year-old. It was the day that I turned 6, and I was born in Venezuela. And so I don't really know any of my extended family. I didn't grow up with them. And so all of the sort of grandparent interactions that is so commonplace in American culture, or really just anyone's culture, is not something that I've really gotten to have. And so when my grandfather passed, I more so experienced his passing through my mom and how that affected her, instead of any of the memories that I had built with him, because any memories that I had with him was whenever I was 5. And so I hardly remember any of that. And so it's a very different experience whenever you aren't necessarily interacting with that individual's legacy through you, but interacting with that individual's legacy through someone else. And how you had mentioned a representative, right? And so a lot of times the legacy that we might get from our ancestors is only through representatives, and whatever stories you might have from them, whatever nuggets of wisdom. And even that is a kind of filtering that we wouldn't necessarily get if we had a video of them or a recording of them. But instead, the stories that my mom decides to tell, and the stories that the representatives decide to tell, that, hey, this story encapsulates that person, but that's also filtered through maybe the way that they tell stories and the things that are important to them. And so our legacies are kind of always shifting and changing if they're not through us directly. And so I appreciate the emphasis that you have on that, on shaping your own legacy, because if you don't, then someone else will, and it may not be necessarily what you want. And so, yeah, I don't necessarily know my grandfather's legacy. I mostly know his legacy through my parents and what they passed down to me about him.
I document a lot of my family's history. I have binders of information, photo albums, just all of these things that I have accumulated in the past 10 years, because I wasn't always doing this. But what motivated me was my granddaughter, one of my granddaughters, when she was a freshman in college. I'll never forget. It was a winter morning, too. She called me and said, Grandma, can you send me, I'm in this African-American history class, and we're doing some family history. Could you send me some information? I had nothing. Do you hear me? Well, I did have these 2 books that I said it was God working then, but nothing I had really looked at much. So therefore, I didn't have anything. But right at that moment, I made a decision that I was not going to be caught like this anymore. and I began to gather information, create these what I call family souvenir books for my family, and that's what came out of that. But let me also add this: it's interesting to me how my children have all of this at their fingertips. Do you know they very seldom, if ever, look at it? I'm not really surprised because I've already been warned of that. Really, they won't. It might be my grandchildren's children who may take an interest in it. Because I think when we're living with people, it's not that important. Who cares about all of that? But you never know. I just want them to have it. Because I think that I just think it's nothing greater than a person's story. And what we're doing right now, I tell you, I just love this. I do. This is my favorite conversation. It's talking about things like this. And so let me ask you this. How would you want to be remembered? And let me say this, let me start this one off before I forget it, okay? I am visually impaired. You know, it's called also, you could say I'm legally blind. That's the way it's also categorized. But I have not let it stop me. Now, there was a time in my life where I did, though. I was always the victim. Oh, I can't do this because I can't see this, I can't see that. But I was able to come out of that. And once I did, I was off and running because I realized all the things I could do with this impairment. So what I want my children to know, I want them to know that how strong their mom and their grandmother was. So that if whatever's going on in their life, you can overcome it and be just who you want to be. But of course, you do have to work at it. And I think that's a wonderful way to be remembered. You say, yeah, well, my grandma, she couldn't see that good, but boy, you sure couldn't tell it. In fact, that's what my grandchildren say now. You know, they don't even think of me as being visually impaired. So what about you? What about you, Kendall? How would you want to be remembered?
Thank you for this question, because this question is at its core what we're talking about. Legacy is allowing those who are close to us and love us to be able to remember us in such a way. And I like this topic because it's super important for someone to know who you were. You know, years on down the road, I tell people this regularly, that when my great-great-great-grandchildren are running around playing and they're having Christmas and they look up at the wall above the fireplace and they say, "Who's that, man?" You know, I want someone in my family to be able to say, "That is your great-grandfather. He was relentless about his principles," because I heard something when I was younger that said, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. Mm-hmm. And so I always think about this all the time. And so the principles of what I'm learning in life that are who I am is what I want to be known for. I want to be known for a person who had some great gifts, great abilities, and took and used that, because life, you know, has a way of getting on each and every one of us. Mm-hmm. But here's what I don't want, and I'm hard on myself, mm-hmm. because I don't want someone, no offense, that can't see to outwork me. right? And so I sometimes look at people who have that relentless fire, and I have that, but do I have it to that same degree? Because if you are running around with no legs and you're running further than I'm running with two good legs, then what am I doing with myself? Am I really emptying the tank? And when this time, whatever it is that I have is over, the thing that I want to be known for is using every ounce of what I had and making it not giving up. And sometimes you want to. There's times where I've wanted to say, you know what, forget this. But it just staying the course and staying with it, but also just using it to the best of your abilities and not being, because I was given everything. I have all my senses. I have a lot of things that someone else did not have. And someone else has, and I'm not really comparing to people, but someone else had a little bit more of a challenge in that regard that I did. And maybe I've gone through something and I looked at it and said, oh, well, this isn't, working for me. And you talked about being a victim. And that, if you just look at it in that regard, it helps you to not become a victim. And I want to be the victor in my story and this thing called life. And so if I can be known for a relentless person that just decided that I'm going to use every ounce of me while I still can.
Very good.
Beautiful.
Very good.
For me, I think, yes, I'm still relatively young, so it's sort of still a journey, but so far I feel like I want to be remembered, yes, for the music, and I hope that people have enjoyed it and has done something for them, and whatever music I go on to make, that has been emotionally cathartic or just a fun time or whatever that is. I hope that any messages that I've left through my podcast, that I've facilitated a platform for wisdom and deep conversation. But then I also want to maintain the authenticity in regards to, being relentless in trying to be as transparent as possible and showing who I am, flaws and all. And so I don't want people to necessarily go back and think, oh, look at this amazing, perfect person. I want all of the flaws in there to be remembered too, because if we regard these people as gods and heroes, then we might lose sight of the nugget of the flaws that actually helps others relate to us even more. And so, Santiago, he was really introspective and philosophical and all the stuff that he did, but he was really bad at responding to emails sometimes. And so, I love that. I want all of that to be in there, and that is part of the legacy, and that is part of who I am. And so, yeah, I think, yes, we can have reverence to the past, but also to acknowledge the flaws so that we can learn from it too. And so I don't just want to be remembered for all of the things that people enjoy, but I want to be remembered for all of the flaws that I also have.
Exactly. And that's overcoming the obstacles. And we all have had obstacles, things that we've had to overcome. But it's when we come through it, when we don't allow ourselves to be victims, but we work through those obstacles. You don't have to be stuck. I used to call it stuck on stupid. You can carry on. But I do understand, because I don't like to read these stories where all they share is the good stuff. I say, oh, come on. Let's get to some. Let's get to the dirty stuff now. I know you were not all that good. And that's what makes it interesting, because everyone wants to know how you got over. What did you do? That you did have a problem, but you worked it out. And that's what's important. You didn't quit. And so, that being said, we have come to the end of this wonderful podcast, and it's been really thought-provoking, because I always glean something from each one of you, as it should be. And as I said before, this is my favorite topic. I feel so strongly about it. And if you're listening, and if you hear me say this, I know you are listening. So I hope that you've heard something that will motivate you to document your stories. You are definitely worth it. I am a certified guided autobiographer, and which simply means that I can guide you through the process. I do have classes online. I do workshops, and you can reach me. First of all, check out my Facebook page, and that's Outlive Your Life Legacy Workshop. Or you can reach me by email at talk, and that is T as in Tom, ALK, Watkins, WATKINS, at gmail.com if you want to learn more. Also, I want you to know that this podcast is part of the Building Your Bridges Network. So I hope you've enjoyed this podcast today. And I thank my guest, Kendall. Any last word you want to say?
Yeah, I just would say don't be afraid to be authentically you, and allow people to see that you do have some scars. You have some greatness, because I believe we all come from greatness. So that's there. But in order to obtain the greatness, we had to go through the fire. And those are dark days. Those are lonely nights. And those leave a stain on who we are. And if we are fortunate enough to leave the breadcrumbs of our life so that someone could know who we are at our core, I would definitely encourage that.
Leave
and
a
you
trail.
taught me that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Leave a trail. Santiago, any last words for our audience?
Listen to my podcast. It's called Bit Depth.
I love it. I love it.
But also, I think, the authenticity part. But work together to achieve change. We are very focused on the individual here, but also none of these legacies are forged alone.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so know that writing your legacy is about leaving our values behind, not our valuables. Michelle Obama says, remember that you are important, or we do matter. Our obstacles, our struggles, our successes, all of it makes up you. Remember that. See you the next time.